now. And we are now both live on Zoom and live on YouTube. So once again, welcome everybody. My name is Brent McCarty. I'm the Shooting Access Coordinator for the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources. I'm going to introduce Becky Wallen and Elizabeth Coots, who are going to be doing our presentation today, both the hunting aspect of dove hunting and the cooking aspect of dove hunting. So we'll get them on here in just a second. Again, remember we are live, so please do try to keep it PG. Make sure you put any questions or comments you might have in the chat, and we'll make sure we do our best to answer those questions at the end of the presentation. And make sure you also please put your name and where you're from in the chat, and that will help us later on when we're evaluating the class. So first, I'm going to introduce Becky. Becky, you wanna, there you are. Let me spotlight your screen here, Becky. So Becky Wallen is the Field to Fork Coordinator for the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife. Becky, how long have you been doing that?
A little over 5 years.
A little over 5 years. Wow. Doesn't seem like it could be that long.
I know.
And Elizabeth, I will go ahead and introduce you. I know your part's not till later, but we'll go ahead and introduce Elizabeth. And her title is so long that I actually had her email me or message me her title a little bit ago. So I'm going to read it right off the screen. She is the Woodford County. Oh, hang on. Spotlight you here. There we go. She is the Woodford County Extension Agent for Family and Consumer Sciences with the University of Kentucky Cooperative Extension Service. And Elizabeth, thank you again for agreeing to come out. This is, how many of these have you done for us? At least 3?
Not sure. A few. I've been here for a few, yeah.
We're always glad to have you on, and your expertise. I always learn something, and I always wow people when I tell them, meat's good for 4 hours at 40 degrees or above, Say, oh, I learned that from Elizabeth. So,
I hope I didn't tell you 4 hours because it's 2 hours, Brent.
No, the 4s. Just kidding.
We'll talk later and make sure
later. That's not important right
you
now.
learned from that lesson that we taught.
So, but thank you again, Elizabeth, for coming on, and we will come back around to you in a little bit so you can tell people more lies about 2 hours. And Becky, gonna roll it right over to you so you can kick us off with the hunting aspect of our Field to Fork class.
Yes, and for that portion, I do have a PowerPoint, so can you see the entire PowerPoint, Brent?
It is perfect.
Wonderful. All right, so let's get going. We have quite a bit to cover and a short amount of time, so I'm going to roll on pretty quick here, but if you need me to go back and re-explain something, please don't hesitate to ask. We're going to cover some species ID, hunting equipment for dove hunting, hunting regulations, of course, very important, shooting tips, field locations, the hunt setup, and we're going to talk about the Cooperative Dovefield program with the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources. So really fast, I'll just say that the difference between males and female doves is really not that big. The males are slightly larger, but just if you had them both, one in one hand, one in the other, they're going to look pretty similar. And the regulations are the same for both sex, so don't worry about being able to tell the difference between male and female. So they are named mourning doves, and it's not mourning like good morning, it's mourning like in mourning, and that's because of the haunting and sad cooing sound that they make. So you've probably also heard a sound when they take off. It sounds like they're whistling, and that's actually coming from the air moving between under their wings. And that's a pretty good indicator that doves are around when you're in the field, especially if you're sitting with your back on a tree line. then you can hear them coming out of the tree line, and it kind of gives you this heads up before they fly over. So if you haven't heard that, try to watch the birds that are in your neighborhood or coming to your bird feeder, and try to train your ear to listen for that whistling sound. Mourning doves have a pretty long and pointed tail, and you might not think that that's really obvious now, but start looking at the birds that you see out every day, and you'll notice that it's pretty evident which ones have these long pointed tails. The doves, they'll start standing out. So just use your surroundings now before you hit the field to kind of train your eye and train your ear as well. And then they also have these narrow wings, and when they're in flight, that's going to be one of your biggest indicators that when they're against a bright skyline and you can kind of only see a silhouette, you're going to want to look for the narrow wings and that long pointed tail. There are some other dove species that you might encounter depending on where you are in the state of Kentucky, or maybe you're hunting in a different state. There's a white-winged dove, and they have a white band on their coverts, which is just a fancy word for the feathers that line their wings, and it's visible at all times, even when they're perched and when they're in flight. And the habitats are similar to mourning doves, but in Kentucky, we kind of only see these in the very western part of the state, in the crop land there. They are different. Their tail is different. It's stubby and square. So you'll be able to tell the difference if you have a keen eye between the white-winged dove and the mourning dove, even if you don't see the white band right away. They are a little bit larger, but not significant. And they do count towards your daily limit. Now we're going to talk really in depth about daily limits and possession limits in just a little bit, but I wanted you to know now what counts towards that and what doesn't. Moving on, there is a Eurasian collared dove that you can harvest as well. They have this black slash that goes across the back of their neck. And if you harvest one and clean it in the field, which is legal, it does count towards your 15 bird daily dove limit, because it's hard, you can't positively identify it at that point if it's completely cleaned. But if you leave the head or the wing remained attached, or if you just leave the bird whole in transport and while you're in the field, then you can have an unlimited number of Eurasian collared doves. And again, you'll kind of see these more in the far western part of the state, but you might see them elsewhere too. And so I do have a note here. We do strongly encourage you to stop hunting for collared doves. Even though you can take an unlimited number of them, it's kind of hard to explain that, oh, I have my mourning dove limit, but I'm just hoping that a collared dove comes along. They're kind of rare. So once you get your dove limit, go ahead and call it a day. But if you see some collared doves along the way, you're more than, it is legal to take those.
Just to clarify, Becky, sorry. Stop hunting for collared doves when you have your mourning dove limit, right? Not stop hunting for collared doves, but stop hunting when you have your mourning dove limit, right? Yeah, definitely. Okay, sorry. I'm sorry.
No, thank you. Thank you for asking for clarification. Feel free to keep chiming in, Brent, if there's other things like that too. Thank you.
Oh, you know I will.
All right, so the last species I wanted to talk about is pigeons, because this is an invasive species in Kentucky, which means they're not native, and they have a tendency to spread to a degree that can cause damage to the environment, the economy, or human health. So there's no limits on pigeons. They taste just as good as a dove, and because they're so much bigger than a dove, you can clean them in the field, and you don't have to leave like a head or a wing attached, because it's very obvious what is a pigeon breast, and a dove breast. So you can clean them in the field if you want to, and you can take as many as you want. And yeah, it's whatever you prefer. And again, we encourage you to stop hunting for pigeons when you've reached your daily dove limit so that there's no confusion with an officer if he stops by. So just a quick overview of the dove species that we just talked about. You've got the mourning dove with their long pointed tail and their slender wings. And then you've got the white-winged dove that has that white band, and the Eurasian collared dove with the black collar on its neck. So let's dive into some regulations. What license do you need to hunt doves in Kentucky? So you'd need, first of all, your statewide hunting license. And then you have to purchase your Kentucky Migratory Game Bird and Waterfowl Hunting Permit. That's an additional permit that you need to have. And finally, you have to complete your Harvest Information Program survey. We call it the HIP survey. And it gives you a pretty lengthy completion number that you have to put. You want to write that down on your license, or if you just do all of this at one time before you print your license, so you've bought your license, you've bought your hunting permit, and then you go still in My Profile, which is the system we use, and complete your survey, the survey number will show up on your license automatically, and you don't have to worry about writing it down. It'll be printed right there with everything else. Shooting hours for doves are a little bit different if you're more used to hunting like large game like deer. From September 1st on private land, it's 11 a.m. To sunset, not 30 minutes after or before, just sunset of the local time. And then you can start hunting 1/2 hour before sunrise, but it ends at sunset. On public land, from September 1st to October 26th, you can start hunting at 11, end at sunset. But then there are 2 other segments of dove seasons in Kentucky. So for the second and third segments, you can begin 1/2 hour before sunrise, so a little bit earlier, to sunset. And then I wanted to talk about wanton waste for a second too. So we want to make sure that we're being responsible hunters and we're giving the animals the credit that they deserve. So in Kentucky, all migratory game birds shall be retrieved if possible and retained in the custody of the hunter in the field. So we don't want to just leave them. We want to make every effort we can to find them, watch where they fall, and retrieve those birds and enjoy them, because dove's like one of the best wild game meats I've ever had. I love it so much. So it's totally worthwhile if you're going to go out there and spend the time in the field to collect every one of them that you can. All right, so I told you we talk about bag limits and possession limits. In Kentucky, you have a daily limit of 15 doves, and that's how many you can take in one day. You also have a possession limit of 45. That's the number of daily limits that are allowed to be kept in the field or in transit, not in your freezer, in the field or in transit. And then as far as tagging goes, there aren't really any, like you don't telecheck your doves, right? Like a turkey or a deer. But what you do want to do, if you're leaving the meat with somebody else for cleaning or storage or whatever, if you're like me, I leave a lot of my meat with my parents because they have a much bigger deep freeze than I do. And so I make sure that it's got my name on the bags and where my address, my personal address, the total number of birds by species, and the date the birds were taken. And that just covers everything in case the deep freeze was inspected for whatever reason. And then the small note at the bottom, you may or may not be able to see this depending on what device you're watching from tonight, but I just wanted to make a note that a violation of the laws for migratory birds is a violation of state and federal laws, because migratory birds are protected under the Lacey Act. So we really want to make sure that we're covering all our bases and not breaking any laws. Okay, so let's talk about equipment. Most people use a shotgun. That's kind of the go-to thing here for doves. Legally, and this is why I have these, if you can see the different colors, I have the 10 gauge or smaller is in orange here, because legally that's what it has to be. Now, I have a recommendation of using an improved or modified choke. Now, the choke, if you're not familiar with what that term is, it is something that is can be inserted, screwed into the muzzle of the barrel, and it controls the pattern of your shot. So typically it chokes down, the tighter the choke gets, to control the pattern and make the pattern tighter and help you shoot a little bit farther. An improved and modified choke is a little bit looser, but it still holds a decent pattern for a good distance, so that you can reach out there at these flying objects. And then legally, your shotgun has to be plugged to hold only 3 shells. So I'm going to jump ahead and show you what I'm talking about here with the plugs. This is a pump shotgun. And right here, if you can see my cursor, underneath the barrel, underneath the forestock is a magazine, a tubular magazine. And it can probably hold, I don't know, let's say 5 shells. You insert them in the bottom of the gun here. If it's not plugged. Legally, to hunt doves in Kentucky, you have to plug the shotgun, which I'll show you what a plug looks like. Here's a manufactured plug by Remington. You have to insert that into the tubular magazine from the other end so that you can only fit 2 shells behind the plug, and then you can have 1 shell in the chamber. So 3 shells total. And you can see here, this is the spring that came out of the tubular magazine. It's kind of coiled up in this graphic here. And the plug is inside the spring, and you can see that it takes up 3 shells worth of space so that there's only 2 in the magazine at one time. Now, if you have, if you're a turkey hunter and you shoot 3.5-inch shells, you might want to double check your plug before you head out with 2 3/4-inch shells, because it's a pretty common issue that you can get 3 2 3/4-inch shells in a space where you cannot get 3 3.5-inch shells. So definitely double check that before you head out. That's one of the most common things that people get cited for every year. And it's pretty easy to fix. You don't have to use a manufactured plug. You can cut a dowel rod. You can use a stick in a pinch. Just make sure it's not green so it doesn't rust your gun from the inside out. You can use a pencil, but make sure that it's plugging properly. All right, the next piece of equipment you're going to need is ammunition, of course. So there is non-toxic, non-lead ammunition, and that is required on some public properties in Kentucky. So make sure you check before you head out to a field what the regulations are for that field. And then we recommend size 6, 7, or 7.5 shot. And if you're not familiar with shot size, the bigger the number, the smaller the pellets are in the shot, and the more pellets there are. So your 7.5 is going to be smaller, and you'll have a little bit more of them. So moving on to the extra stuff, you might want to take a chair because you're going to be waiting around for a little while. And you want to enjoy it. You want to be comfortable. Water and snacks and sunscreen if you're kind of on the pink side like I am. Camo or earth-colored clothing and a hat. Definitely a hat to kind of help shade your face too and keep you kind of more camouflaged. Eye and ear protection. Definitely eye protection. Ear protection is a really good idea, but it can, not everybody wears it in the field. You're not shooting as much as you would on a range. It's totally personal preference though. Decoys, if you would like to have them, we'll talk more about decoys in a little bit, and definitely a map of where you're going, and then a hunt plan, which is something that you leave behind. Let someone else know where you're going, when, and when you plan to return, just to cover all your bases, keep you safe, and then that way somebody knows where to start looking if they have to come looking for you. So leave a hunt plan behind too. All right, we already looked at these. So we'll talk about field safety and etiquette. Never shoot low flying birds. This keeps everybody safe. This keeps the guy across the field from you safe, and the lady that brought her lab to retrieve the birds for her keeps the dogs safe. You always want to see sky behind your target. Unload your gun when you're moving or retrieving a bird, and keep the gun pointed in a safe direction at all times. This is typically towards the sky. That's just a safe way to go. And a two-hand carry is what we recommend so that you have the most control of your firearm. Be aware of other hunters and their shooting lanes. And when I talk about a 45-degree shooting lane, if you stick your thumbs out like this and move, you keep looking straight, and you move your thumbs away to where you start not to be able to see your thumbs. I'll turn so you can see kind of what I'm doing here. In your peripherals, that's about a 45-degree angle, and that's your shooting lane. Now, if somebody's to your left, then your shooting lane rotates to your right. If somebody's to your right, vice versa. So practice with that before you hit the field, and keep enough space between you and other hunting groups, about 50 yards minimum. And definitely clean up after yourself. It really sucks going to a field and try and enjoy the day, and you're just distracted by all the spent shells that somebody else left behind. So, clean up after you're done for the day. All right, so some shooting tips. This is a little bit, I just want to encourage you to go out and practice hands-on with this, but I just wanted to talk really quick about some ways that you might be able to improve your wing shooting. When you're holding a firearm, you make sure that your cheek is on the stock, and the biggest thing is you want to bring the stock to your cheek instead of putting the butt of the gun in your shoulder pocket and bending down to meet your cheek to the stock. Go ahead and bring it up a little bit, and for people like me, the stock tends to come up over my shoulder just a little bit, and it's kind of resting in that pocket, but also in that collarbone area, and that's perfectly fine. As long as you have a decent firm grip on the foregrip, the kick is not going to be bad at all. You're going to absorb it with your body. You are doing a little bit more of instinct shooting when you're shooting a moving target like a dove. We're going to show some videos that demonstrate how the point and shoot method may not be the best way to go, but instead you want to lead your target and swing through it. So the videos will demonstrate it a lot better than me talking about it. So I'll keep going here. If your shotgun has two beads on it, one in the middle of the barrel and one in the front, you want to stack them like a figure eight. If you just have the front bead, then the barrel needs to be extremely flat so that you only see the bead sitting on a flat plane like this. If you see half the bead, then the barrel is you're pointing too low. And if you see the bead plus the barrel, then you're pointing too high. So it needs to be super flat with the bead sitting right on top. All right, let me stop sharing and then jump back into sharing so I can show you these really sweet videos. Okay, so, and these go pretty quick. There's no sound or anything. I just wanted to use them as demonstration. And Brent, if they don't play, just chime in here. We'll skip it. So this is 4 types of wing shooting. This is the swing through method that we talked about. You start behind the target, move over it, swing through, and then when you're leading it, you shoot. The pull away, I don't necessarily recommend. I like the follow through better. Then you're going to maintain your lead. And the intercept method, which is just another fancy way of talking about each of the, I think, the other shooting methods there. Okay, so I'm thinking that looked pretty good because Brent didn't interrupt here. So let's move on to the next one, which
so far
is
so good.
Awesome, which is the difference between aiming and leading. So let's watch the first couple of these shots. So this one, he's aiming. And notice that he missed. He actually shot right behind that clay pigeon. This one, he's going to lead. The shot happens in front of, it seems like in front of the target, but when the clay pigeon is moving, traveling through the air, it intercepts the shot. So here he's showing how he shot behind it the first time, where he was aiming. And when he's leading, the shot goes out in front, but the target intercepts the shot in the air. And then the last one, we won't watch all of this, but here's how it'll look with the actual doves. He's leading it pretty well. And it just connects just like that. So if you have any questions, I'll share these videos, the links to these videos, so that you can go back and reference them later. But I just feel like I'm a visual person, so that gives me a better idea on what I'm trying to do. What's the mechanics of shooting before I get out there? All right, back to the PowerPoint. All right, so we've already talked about ammunition pretty well. We talked about size being 6, 7, or 7.5. This graph is just for discussion purposes, and that, you know, the recommendations that we make. You can use a 12 gauge or a 20 gauge for dove hunting, or like we talked about, 10 gauge or smaller, anything in between too. So go to the next slide. Okay, there's a lot happening on this slide, but bear with me here. So I wanted to really talk about non-toxic shot. Non-toxic shot is defined as any shot type that does not cause sickness and death when it's ingested by a migratory bird. And you might be thinking, well, how's it going to be ingested by a bird? There's two ways that I know of, and Brent, you can chime in on this. I know you're really knowledgeable if you want to, but then the one big one being for waterfowl, when you're hunting over water, they feed on the aquatic plants and submerged vegetation and things of that nature. So if there's a lot of lead in the water, then you're contaminating everything that they're eating. And then the other one being predatory birds eating the unrecovered, the animals that are not recovered but have the lead in the bodies of them, and getting lead poisoning from that. And it's a horrible thing. So to combat both of those scenarios, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service approves all of these non-lead types, and you can find this list online. I just wanted you to know that there's a lot of options out there, and you can, they can be a little bit more expensive, but they're just as effective. Steel is just as effective as lead. To compensate for a little bit lighter weight metal, you can use a shot that's 1 or 2 sizes larger than the lead shot you would typically pick out. Steel shot does penetrate better, and it has a denser pattern than the lead. So you can use a more open choke if you're going to use the steel shot. And you can use non-toxic shot even if the area doesn't require it. You can feel free to make that choice for yourself. And so just another reminder that some wildlife management areas do require the non-toxic shot, and you cannot even have lead shells on your person if you're hunting in an area that does not allow it. So not in your gun case, not in your ammo bucket, not in your truck. Don't take it to the field. You can still get busted for it.
Becky, I just wanted to say thank you for including that, because that's near and dear to my heart, and I've seen the after effects of scavengers eating carcasses with lead in them, and it's not fun. So thank you for including that. And yes, you did perfect. Sounded great.
Awesome. Thanks, Brent. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about actually being out there and trying to get set up so that we can harvest some doves. Their daily cycle is pretty simple. They drink water about first thing in the morning, and then they feed and rest the entire rest of the day. Sounds like a pretty good life to me. They're typically feeding on the ground and in open areas. So that's why you'll see some of our fields are manipulated by having tracks of it bulldozed. The other cut.
Bush hogged.
Bush hogged. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I was struggling with my agriculture practice terms here. And then, so there's like 4 ways that you can set up in the field. You can hunt next to large piles of brush and trees with exposed branches, because they're going to land on those areas. Power lines the same way, against hay bales, or concealed within a crop that's left standing. So I've got pictures to visually demonstrate all of these. And you'll notice in these photos that you're really not concealed that much, but it's just enough. And you can wear camouflage, but as long as it's a dull color and you're pretty much, in the shade, or the real key with dove hunting is don't start moving, don't start preparing for the shot when you see the birds coming from way across the field. You want to wait until they get close. And so that's why it takes a little bit of practice, because you're kind of bringing your gun up quickly to find your target, to follow through and swing through and take your shot. Takes a little bit of practice. Power lines are a great option because birds love to sit on them. And I've got some arrows here pointing out that these are doves. I know they're doves, even though it's just a silhouette because of their long pointy tail. But do not shoot the power lines, because a shotgun can cut a power line, and that just causes all kinds of problems. So wait until the birds are flying to, but not on, or flying away. And then you can lean up against a hay bale, sit around that, or within the crop that's left standing. And this is like probably the number 1 way that I hunt doves, is just tucking into a little patch of something that's left up in a field. You can use decoys. You do not have to use decoys. I've seen them work, and I've seen them absolutely not work. When they work, it's great. And when they don't, it's more gear you have to carry and lug out into the field. So you've got the ones that are clipping on. You can make some homemade ones out of water bottles and tie them to a string and paint them dove color. You can get really fancy and build your own tree out of PVC pipe, or you can use these Mojo, the moving targets, decoys that you stick in the ground, and they kind of look like they're flying. I would recommend, you can use just one, but I would recommend having 2 or 3 to make it look a little bit more natural. And I've also seen people not have anything to clip them to and just toss them on the ground. So it's not too hard to fool doves. Where to hunt? So you can hunt over any form of crop, including corn, sunflowers, wheat, hemp, that are all used for legitimate agricultural practices. Anything that produces a large amount of seed is generally going to attract these birds to your area. We have the WMAs and the Cooperative Dovefield program, which I'm going to talk more about here in just a second. Or you can plant your own field if you would like. And it doesn't have to be ginormous. It can be, it doesn't have to be 50 acres of land. We typically shoot for, with the Cooperative Dovefield program, like 10 to 40, 10 to 30, something like that, or less. Just give it a try sometime. We do have some recommendations for planting your own field at home. We have what's called Habitat How-Tos at fw.ky.gov, and they're under the landowner resources on our website. So you're gonna, we do want to talk about baiting a little bit. It's illegal to hunt doves or waterfowl over baited fields. And those are areas where you have added an attractant that's not something that would normally be there or is used for a legitimate agricultural practice. So that's where you'll get into trouble if you'll see throwing down extra grain or salt or other attractants. That's considered baiting. For doves, you can manipulate crops like bush hogging, burning, raking, or etc. But you cannot do this for waterfowl. So you can't, if you do manipulate the crop for doves, make sure you're not hunting the same fields for waterfowl season. Here's a little bit more information about our Cooperative Dovefield program. Enrollment starts September 1st and goes through December 15th this year. Landowners can earn up to $10,000 in the program, $300 per acre planted. We're looking for fields that are 10 to 30 acres, and the payment does depend on the number of acres that are enrolled, the crop type that you choose to plant, and the fulfillment of the plot management agreement with the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources. If this is something you're interested in, you can contact your local private lands biologist or your NRCS liaison, and you can find those contacts at fw.ky.gov under private lands biologist, or you can call our 1-800-858-1549 information center. And then we have a new program this year, the Voluntary Public Access Dovefield program. And this is where we're looking to lease land that is already being used for cropland. And we know that there's an opportunity there for people to kind of, after they've harvested their crop, the doves are already there. So you could get into the lease program with us and allow public access to that property and get paid for it. So we're really looking for some hemp fields or the corn silage crops, tobacco fields too, anything like that. If you want more information on this, please call our biologist, Wes Little, and his number's listed there and his email's listed there, but I can always send it to you again, or you can talk to your private lands biologist. All right, and then I just want to do a little plug for Kentucky Afield. There's some really cool dove hunting episodes that they've got. They have, this is the longest running outdoor TV show in the nation. So we've been doing this for a little while, and they do a great job of showing how a dove hunt can go and how much fun you can have. So I encourage you to check them out. They have their own YouTube channel with these episodes there, and they also have a podcast. There's also the Kentucky Afield magazine and the famous Kentucky Afield calendar that I highly recommend any sportsman and woman have in their home, because it'll give you all of the upcoming open seasons and also some pretty cool things like nature notes and outdoor tips. So you can check all of that out on our website too, or on YouTube. They have all their episodes posted every Monday. And yeah, it's just, it helps you get in the mindset, helps you get excited. So that is all that I have. Stop sharing here.
All right, Becky, thank you. And we're going to have to jump right into Elizabeth's talk, but we will get questions after Elizabeth is done, because you got a little chatty, Becky, went a little overboard. Maybe if I hadn't interrupted you a couple times, you'd have been all right. But, yeah, we will definitely, if you guys have any questions for Becky, either put them in the chat or we'll have you unmute yourselves later on after Elizabeth is done, and we will do our best to make sure we answer those questions. So now, thank you again, Becky. Going to turn it over to Elizabeth so that she can teach us, after we've had the opportunity to go out and harvest these doves, how are we going to eat them? I like eating them as much as I like harvesting them. So Elizabeth, if you would, take it away.
All right. Let's see. Are you spotlighting me? I can't tell.
I am, yes.
Okay. I think I changed it on mine, so it probably looks different. So, all right. Well, now is the fun part, like Brent said, the eating part. Although there's a little work involved in preparing and cooking. Same goes for the hunt as well. There's fun, but there's also a little preparation that goes involved in that. So I'm going to be doing baked dove breast tonight. And the name of the recipe is Kentucky Baked Dove Breast. If you have not seen our wonderful Cook Wild Kentucky recipe cards, these are available through Fish and Wildlife and your local extension office. If you're in Kentucky, there is an extension office in every county in Kentucky, and we have these recipe cards available. This is just one of, 25 maybe that we have now. We started this project a couple of years ago. Like I said, it's called Cook Wild Kentucky, and it is a partnership between the University of Kentucky Cooperative Extension Service and the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources. And through the University of Kentucky, our SNAP program, or the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, education program, really spearheaded this project. So I'm going to put the link to the recipe in the chat if you want to look at that while we're going through. But to start, this recipe calls for 12 dove breasts. And I just want to say too that, the typical way, and you can probably answer the question, the typical way that the majority of people like to cook dove breast is wrapped in bacon with maybe a little jalapeno and cream cheese, which certainly is fine and is delicious, but this is just another option and a little bit healthier option as well. But this is a way that you can kind of make it into a meal. So the recipe calls for 12 dove breast. It calls for 2 cups of buttermilk. And the very first step is to cover your dove breast in buttermilk in a covered container in the refrigerator overnight, or if you don't have that long, you could just do it, all day if you're going to cook them at night. So you're going to cover them in buttermilk, just kind of marinate them and soak them. You may or may not be familiar with soaking wild game in buttermilk, but that just helps to tenderize it. And it's not as important with dove, just because dove doesn't really have that much of a gamey taste, but it does help to remove some of that gamey taste. And it just enhances the flavor a little bit. And of course, when you marinate anything, it is going to make it a little more juicy, a little more tender. So that's the first step. And so I'm going to start the recipe here. And I have my dove breast right here that I've just poured them in a colander, and you can see they're kind of white, and that's the buttermilk that's coated to them. So I've drained them here, and I'm going to dry them off with a paper towel. And of course I have raw meat here, so I'm being very careful that I am keeping all my raw meat juice contained, and that I'm not cross-contaminating the raw meat with any vegetables or any fruits or any surfaces that I'm not going to be cooking. So I want to make sure that my space is clear. So I'm just going to pat dry, not perfectly, just get the excess moisture and buttermilk off of these dove breasts. Doesn't take too much to do that. And then I'm going to mix some spices together. So we are going to mix 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt, 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper, and 1.5 teaspoons of smoked paprika. And you can, with these spices, you can mix it up. I always like to encourage people to use what you have at home or use what you like. I think that if I was gonna make this at home, I would probably put a little spice in here, like maybe the paprika made me think of cayenne pepper. So I think I would probably add a little bit of spice to this. So I'm gonna go ahead and now I've sprayed my baking dish, and I'm just using, this is an 8x8 baking dish. I think that with this recipe, it's better to use a smaller baking dish than a larger one, because I want my meat and all my vegetables to be kind of scrunched together so that it keeps it moist. If I have a larger one and they're all spread out, it might dry out a little bit. So I'm just gonna go ahead and put my dove meat in my bowl here, or my baking dish rather. Trying not to touch it so I don't have to wash my hands, but I am gonna have to touch it to rub the spices on. So I'm just gonna put a glove on. And I'm just gonna sprinkle this mixture over the doves. I'm gonna use my gloved hand here to kind of mix it up a little. I'm gonna get rid of that spoon. I'm just gonna sprinkle it over. And of course, dove meat, dove breasts are so small, it's not very efficient to coat one side of them and then flip them all over and coat the other side. They're so little, you can just mix them by hand here. Okay, so that is nice and evenly coated. I'm gonna just spread them in the bottom of my baking dish, just like this. Get rid of this glove here. Okay, and then the next step, the recipe calls for 2 medium apples, 1 large onion, and 2 celery stalks diced. I'm gonna push this to the side, and I'm actually gonna switch cameras so that you can see a close-up here of how I'm gonna cut some of these vegetables up. So I wanna show you just a trick about cutting an onion. And I have already cut this one a little bit, but the best way to do it is to first, now this one's cut in half, but ignore that for now, pretend like this is a whole onion. So I have the root end of my onion here, and I have the top part, or the stem part of the onion up here. First thing, before you cut the onion in half, cut the top end of the onion off and set that to the side. And the reason that you do that first is so then, and again, now imagine this is a whole onion, I have a flat surface on the bottom here, so I can lay that on my surface and I can more easily hold on to it and cut that onion in half. So to dice the onion, next thing I'm gonna do, and my lights are a little bright in here, but I hope you can see this okay. Now I'm still keeping the root end of my onion intact. I'm gonna cut the onion in half this way, again, keeping the onion intact. And you see how I'm doing my fingers? I kind of have what I'll call a claw. Okay, I'm doing my claw here. I don't want my fingers sticking out. I'm just gonna hold on to it and cut that onion in half. So now basically this is quartered onion. So I'm going to turn it up like this to where I think it's easiest if the rounded part is closest to you. Again, I'm gonna do my claw, and I'm gonna come in here and cut slits through this onion, but I'm keeping it all intact. If you see when I put my knife up here, I'm not cutting all the way through. I'm just cutting to the very top of the onion. And I'm gonna kind of hold the onion like this so I can get all the slits all the way across. And then I'm gonna turn the onion. I apologize that it's a little bright in here. And I'm gonna make just 2 slits right here on the edge. I'm actually gonna hold it like this so I have a little more control. See, I'm putting the tip of the knife down. Oops. Okay, so now my onion is kind of falling apart. You see there's some pieces that are already coming out, but now I'm gonna do my claw and I'm just gonna cut my onion like this, and I have a nice diced onion. And when you're cutting like this, I don't know if you can see, but I'm leaving the tip of my knife down, just like this, and go slow, because even if you're experienced like I am, you can still cut yourself, which I did earlier when I was preparing for this lesson. So it happens to everybody. So now I'm gonna do the other onion the same. I'm gonna have the rounded end towards me. And I'm gonna cut slits all the way through, keeping it the onion intact completely. Flip it. 2 more slits, holding on so that I have control. And dice my onion with my claw here. That is, there's several different ways to cut an onion, but I think that is one of the easier ways. So I have the other half of my onion over here. I'm just going to add this to my bowl. And then I'm going to cut up some celery. This is a pretty large celery stalk, so I'm going to actually cut it in quarters here. And when you're cutting something like celery like this, so it's, you know, a long stick here, I'm going to do a rocking motion. Let's see, I'll turn this way so you can kind of see my hand. Again, I'm going to use my claw, and I'm going to keep the tip of my knife down and kind of slide. Okay, I'm going to kind of rock that knife back and forth, and I'm holding my knife up on the base. If you hold it back here, you don't have as much control. So hold it up on the base, and I'm just going to kind of slide my knife like this. And I tend to go quick, but I am a little more efficient when I go slow, and I really pay attention. But if you think of cutting as, you know, kind of an extension of your arm. Okay, so I have my celery over here. I'm gonna add that. And then I already have my apple cut up over here. My 2 apples, rather, cut up over here. So let's see, I'm gonna switch you back. Cameras, oops, there we go. Okay, so I have my apple here. Now the recipe doesn't say to do this, but I am going to combine the apple and celery and onion just all into this one bowl, just to mix it up a little bit. And then I'm going to put this on top of my dove breast. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to bring this over here. I'm going to drizzle some oil, and it is 1 tablespoon of oil. I'm just going to drizzle this over. The recipe actually says to brush it on, and I think that it's easier just to drizzle it over the top. Because you have already put that dry rub spices on your dove, if you brush it on, I've found that the spice rub kind of comes off with your brush. So just drizzle it on, and then we're going to put this vegetable and fruit mixture on top here. And you might think that it looks like quite a bit, but once it cooks down. So it turns out to be not as much as you think that it looks in the beginning, because it fills up the pan.
Was that a particular kind of oil, Elizabeth? I mean, obviously, like, you know, like not WD-40 or anything, but you know, yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's not car oil or anything like that. This is actually olive oil. I believe the recipe just calls for vegetable oil. So whatever kind of oil you use in cooking is fine for this recipe. Good question though. So the next step is to add a 1/2 cup of water, and then we're going to bake it. And I think that it's best to add the water just around the edges. And actually, I think that you don't need the entire 1/2 cup. Once it's through cooking, let's see, it's 45 minutes that you're going to bake this in the oven at 350 degrees. So at that 45-minute mark, you're actually going to pour a cup of orange juice in here. And that's going to kind of add just a little extra flavor, just a little sweetener to the dish. And I think that the water and the orange juice combined, it's a little too much. I don't want it to be soupy. So I think that you could get by with a 1/4 cup of water and probably a 1/2 cup or even less of orange juice. But you can, you know, see how it looks when you take it out of the oven and how much you think. Again, it's going to depend on your pan and then how many dove breasts you have. You know, the recipe calls for 12, but you could easily put more or less in here, so you can just adjust your recipe. So now I'm going to cover this. You want to cover it tightly. We want to make sure that it's going to be tender and moist. So I'm going to put this in the oven and again, bake it for 45 minutes. And at that 45-minute mark, play the Jeopardy song. Let me grab this. when you take it out of the oven, I don't know if you can see, but all the vegetables and the apples on top, it has really broken down. And there is a little bit of liquid in the bottom of this. So like I said, the next step is to take orange juice. And I have here what the recipe calls for, which is 1 cup, but I'm not gonna add it all, okay? And I am gonna drizzle it just kind of on the top here, because I don't necessarily want it swimming. I don't want it to be soup, although it would be a really good soup. So I'm just gonna coat it. I used about 1/2 cup. So again, it just depends on the size of your pan and how large of the recipe you're doing. So I'm going to put the foil back on top, and then I'm going to put this back in the oven for another 30 minutes. So it's going to be in the oven for a total of 1 hour and 15 minutes. And of course, at that time, then you can eat, which is delicious. Now, one thing that I know we're getting close to time, but one thing that I always encourage people to do is to use what you have and use what you like. The topping on this, the onions and the celery and the apple, kind of makes me think of Thanksgiving. It makes me think of those type of spices. So I think if I was gonna make this again, I would try to do like sage and oregano mixture on top of this, maybe some cumin as well. And I think it would be really good with some breadcrumbs on top, almost like a stuffing type casserole. But I think that's what I would add to it. So I encourage you to take this recipe as it is, but make it work for you and your family. So if there are any questions or any comments, I'd be happy to entertain those. Or if there's any questions for Becky, I guess at this time, we can take those too.
Awesome. Thank you very, very much, Elizabeth. Let's see. We got a couple of good questions in the comments section. I believe both of these are hunting related, though. Just make sure here. Yep. Elizabeth, stick with us, but Becky, if you want to go ahead and come back on as well. So Becky, first question we've got is, are soybean fields good for hunting over for doves? So we mentioned corn, we mentioned wheat, we mentioned obviously sunflowers that we typically plant and that sort of thing, but what about soybeans?
Yeah, soybeans will definitely work. I've personally hunted doves over some soybean fields, so if you can see them there, yeah, I think it'll work.
I know out here in Western Kentucky where I am, corn and soybean fields are everywhere. So
yeah, and that's where I was, Brent, in western, in the western part of the state, over soybean fields. Yep.
Very cool. Okay, how do you breast out your bird? Excellent question.
That is a really good question. So I actually saw the question ahead of time and was able to find another resource to share. I will say that the dove hunting Kentucky Afield video that I will send you guys, it does have a demonstration in it. So make sure you check that out. But for this purpose, our friends over in Arizona Fishing Game had a really decent video. I'm not going to play the sound, but I'll just talk you through it really quick. You can see how they've positioned the bird here on its back. And the trick is that there is no trick. The dove skin is really thin, so it doesn't take a lot of effort to tear it and get it out of the way. I think he's working with some birds that have been ready for a minute, which is why he was kind of pulling. Typically, if they are freshly harvested birds, you can just put your 2 thumbs together and hold the bird on its back, like its back along your fingers. Put your 2 thumbs together over the keel bone, which is this white bone that you can see coming through. The breast meat is on either side. There's 2 breasts on the bird. And then you just push down and spread your thumbs apart from each other, and it will open up for you. Then he's got to stick his thumb underneath the keel bone and you can kind of pull it out without a lot of effort. And then once he gets to that point, you'll see that he takes his game shears, which you don't have to have game shears. You can have kitchen scissors or regular scissors, whatever you've got, to cut the rest of that off at the neck area in the wings. So it's not hard. He's kind of taking his time for demonstration purposes, but the important part here is that you want to make sure you get all the feathers off, and you want to rinse these breasts. Now, if you're going to freeze them, make sure that you pat them dry before you put them in the bag or the vacuum sealer or anything like that, so that you don't have ice crystals form. And that's really all there is to it. Once you have the breast with the bone in it, you just carve the breast meat off in like an L motion, because the keel bone sits like this and the rest of the bone sits like this. So you just carve the breast meat off on each side.
I love dove hunting for a number of reasons. And one of the reasons I love dove hunting is the simplicity of cleaning a dove. So much easier than cleaning just about anything else. And you don't even really, strictly speaking, you don't need any tools to do it. You can do it with your bare hands. You might cut yourself on some bones if you're not careful doing it that way, but you can do it with your bare hands. Very, very simple. Speaking of not cutting yourself, Elizabeth, I got to throw you a compliment, by the way. I was watching your claw that you talked about, and it reminded me, and I know you can appreciate both aspects of this, it reminded me of trigger control on a firearm. Because, you know, when we pick up a firearm, once we learn to keep our finger outside the trigger guard, that finger just automatically goes to the outside of the trigger guard. And it was like your claw, it was like you weren't even thinking about it. You just, boom, there was your claw. Every time you grabbed an onion, boom, there was your claw, right?
That's true. And it comes out more naturally when I'm teaching knife skills.
Hence the cut earlier today, right?
That's right. Yep.
Yeah. Well, folks, do we have any more questions for either Elizabeth or Becky? Now is definitely the time. Okay. Well, thank you all very, very much once again. Got some thank yous coming up in the comment section there as well. Becky, Elizabeth, great job. I learn something every time I listen to you all. Like how it's 2 hours for me to go bad, not 4 hours. I'll remember that better in the future. But thank you all very, very much for everything. And thank you all for attending. And again, remember, please do the post-webinar survey when Becky sends it out. That will help us improve these webinars for the future. Again, thank you all and have a wonderful evening.
Thanks for having me. See ya.
Thanks, Elizabeth.